So what I start with is a little bit dry, but I think it's useful to understanding the things going on there, which is the agencies and organizations that are involved in this project of waterfront development. There are a few, some more important than others, and some are interconnected. But what you see here are most of them, at least. Probably the most important there is in the top left, the Waterfront Toronto, which is a tripartite agency. It's provincial, federal, and municipal, and each of the three levels of government kicks into that agency. It was created in 2001 to coordinate private and public investment on the waterfront. It doesn't, in fact, itself own very much of the waterfront, but it's known for projects, some of which you may be familiar with: the West Donlands, Cherry Beach development, Queens Quay, the work there, the floodplains, Portland's floodplain protection project, which we're going to be talking about, Corktown Common, Quayside, which we may touch on, Parliament Quay, and so on. It collaborates with the private sector in many of these projects. The federal government is another. It owns, in the harbor area, sections of the Breakwall, HMCS York, Fort York Armory, the Fort York National Historic Site, and so on. It's in the Portlands. It doesn't own a great deal of land, but it owns a little bit, and some of it is connected to its port authority, which is Ports Toronto, the next one there. Ports Toronto owns, among other things, 60 Harbor Street, although it just recently sold for development purposes, but the Harbor Commissioner's building is still there. The Outer Harbor Marina, the Island Airport, those lands are leased, but under Ports Toronto control. And Portland's property at the site of the Rochester Ferry Terminal is in Ports Toronto control, so as assorted dock walls around the harbor. Then you have the provincial government, which until recently in the Portlands owned the Hearn Generating Station. It's also the owner, and its major waterfront project actually right now is Ontario Place, which we're not going to be talking about today. But and then it has various authorities and agencies under it, including the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, which is a provincial or a Toronto Region authority. It's involved in waterfront activities, among other things. The Ontario Municipal Board, which is no longer the Ontario Municipal Board, actually now it's the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, but it approves municipal plans, such as the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan and precinct plans and official plans that feed into this type of project. Ontario Power Generation is the operator of the Portlands Energy Center, which is that cogeneration plant right beside the Hearn Generating Station. That's a Crown Corporation owned by the Government of Ontario. And Metrolinx, which is another Crown agency that manages and integrates road and public transport in Ontario. It touches on the Portlands only to the degree that the Ontario line that's being contemplated now will be connecting to transit that goes into the Portlands. So that's that level. Then there's the City of Toronto, which has a waterfront secretariat and parks and recreation, but it also has within its jurisdiction an agency or a group called Create TO, which is involved in a number of waterfront and non-waterfront projects. In addition, there's the Waterfront BIA, the Business Improvement Area. It's one of 83 BIAs across the city. And they operate to sort of advance and promote business interests in their various jurisdictions. There is no BIA in the Portlands, but the Waterfront BIA is a candidate perhaps to expand into that area. Um, and then there's the Toronto Portlands Company, TPLC as it's known as. It's legally the Toronto Economic Development Corporation. It is the city corporation that manages the city's real estate projects, and it promotes development in Toronto's Portlands, and it's part of a larger city approach to centralizing real estate activity. Will be involved, of course, in developing transit in the Portlands as it evolves. And then a non-government agency, of course, is the First Nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, which are involved in planning and discussions in some of their traditional lands. So that's quite a lot. But the one that really figures in most is Waterfront Toronto, which has developed parks along the waterfront that you may already be familiar with, and some that are being developed right now. The York Street Park, which is that park that's right in the area where that York Street exit ramp from the eastbound Gardiner used to be, will be developed into a park, and there'll be a park developed at Reese Street. And then another park is already existing under the Gardiner called the Bentway, which has a linear skating area and so on. And that will be extending underneath the Gardiner as well. It has a number of what it considers priority projects, including the Portlands. It considers revitalizing Queens Quay East towards Parliament Street. It did the section west over to Stadium Road. It's looking at reworking roads and storm sewer systems and dock reinforcements in the East Bayfront area. And if you don't know where that is, I'll show you a map. And completing enhancements also to the Jaclyn Ferry Terminal. If you've taken any of the city ferries, you realize that the current ferry terminal is more like a cattle staging area for, the slaughterhouse. And then it has also plans for things in the longer term. But let's look at the Portlands and the development plans there. This is a view of the future Portlands, and what you see that's different from what we have now is particularly in the northwest corner. A lot of that area north of what's called the shipping channel looks quite different in here, and we'll get into more detail. The shipping channel is the large watercourse that runs from the harbor into the turning basin and almost all the way over to Leslie Street, as you can see. And then you'll recognize in the foreground here the Outer Harbor Marina and so on. We're not going into the Tommy Thompson Park in this discussion, but you could consider that Portlands or perhaps not. For the purposes of city planning, though, really the Portlands are from Unwin Avenue, which is the roadway that runs from Leslie Street over to Cherry Street, south of the Hearn Generating Station and north of the Cherry Beach and so on. That's the southern boundary of what's called the Portlands.
Could you use a pointer?
Yes, I think I can. So this is Unwin Avenue running along here. Can you see my little floating hand?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let me pull this over to where I can. Okay. So anyway, the rationale for this starts with flood protection. The Don River, when it was re-channeled back in the early 20th century, made a 90-degree turn right here and flows into the harbor through the Keating channel, the Keating Cut. And there is nothing to really stop it from flooding this entire area, the south part of Leslieville, and much of the Portlands here are all subject to flooding because this 90-degree bend really has no capacity to manage heavy rainfalls. Here's a little bit of terminology in the surrounding area. We'll start right over here. There's the East Bay front. And then this little notch in here is the Parliament Street slip. This district here is called Keating Channel. Right now, it's just scrub beside Lakeshore Boulevard. The Keating Channel itself runs in here. The Unilever District and West Donlands are just partway up the Don River. And looking south in here, you have Cousins Key and Polson Key. And over here is the film studio district. In fact, there are film companies with studios there now. And then this area will be called Eastport. South along the south side is the South Ship Channel, and this area here labeled Ports Toronto is federal land under Ports Toronto management. This map shows things both current and future. The future here is that the Don River now has another channel right here running along like this. But in addition, this map is identifying heritage buildings and structures, such as the Hearn properties, small properties, we'll get back to them in a minute. Active port uses here, for example, these are storage of salt, road salt, and so on. The active port edges are really marked here in yellow, and you can see that they don't represent a lot of the Portland's waterfront. However, this area has been divided into what Ports or Waterfront Toronto calls unique and memorable districts. And these are the ones. We're going to be looking more at the top up here, which is Villiers Island. Polson Key is here. It's named after the Polson Iron Works that used to exist up over here, but Polson Iron Works was never here. It was just where Polson Iron Works was going to go. The South River here, and it's only called South River because there will be a river running along here on the south side of Villiers Island. Villiers Island is not an island now, but will be an island. Over to the east, on the other side of the Don River, is what's called the McCleary District, which I'll talk about sort of a little bit in conjunction with Villiers Island. And then to the south there is Media City. These are the studios that will be there in the future, for the foreseeable future. And the Turning Basin District, which will remain for the most part industrial in here. And the Warehouse District up here, which will kind of stay the same. The East Port is also going to continue industrial, but you can see there's a little piece right in here that will be different in the future. And the Southport East, this is the what's it called? Portland's Energy Center, PEC, the Hearn Generating Station. This is all to orient you here. This will be called Southport. What you see here, though, is also a bridge across the shipping channel that doesn't exist currently. And that's designed as a lift bridge. There is a lift bridge here. We've talked about that already. And so then you also get back to the property here with Ports Toronto. The planning for this whole area is in more than one city plan. The Portlands planning framework is dealing specifically with the green area there called Portlands. The Villiers Island precinct plan is a subset of the Portlands planning framework. And then the Portlands and South of Eastern Transportation and Servicing Master Plan, there's a long title for you, covers some of the area of the Portlands, but also extends eastward a bit to points east. And those planning structures are all part of the Donmouth Environmental Assessment and Lower Donlands Class Environmental Assessment here. And there will be further precinct plans for the Film Studio District and the South of Eastern Strategic Direction as they roll out. This is, as it says, an artistic rendering of the future Portlands. And this is obviously looking west down the shipping channel. You can see here that lift bridge that will be put in. And you can see this area south here is where the Outer Harbor Sailing Federation, Water Rat Sailing Club, and St. Jamestown, Moordale, Outer Harbor Centerboard Club, Toronto Multi-Hull Cruising Club, Hanlan's Rowing Club, all of those things are in this area. This is Leslie Street running across the bottom of the image. And Leslie Street doesn't look like this now, but is planned to. This little area here, this little notch between Leslie Street and the shipping channel, has a plan now as of a couple of months ago, actually, very recent. It's not a Waterfront Toronto plan, but we'll get to that. So the future vision, you can see up in the north area where you have Villiers Island and the McCleary District, you see buildings that don't exist now, some of considerable height. And you can see also a lot of green that doesn't exist. Flowing through here is that South Don River. This is another so-called artistic rendering. This is looking actually eastward from Cherry Street, where a new bridge will exist. The bridge won't look like this. This is a slightly older image, but the bridge across the new segment of the Don River will be here. The sides of the Don River in this area will be naturalized, as you can see in the image. Off in the distance here, that stack is the Hearn, and this stack over in the farther distance is actually the water filtration plant at Ashbridges Bay. So that just helps you orient yourself a little bit. This is looking sort of northwest. This is what's called the McCleary District. In the foreground is an incineration plant and stack. It's no longer operating as such. So there are plans to keep that structure but repurpose it. These areas here in the McCleary District will become residential areas. This parkland will be expanded. And this is Unwin Avenue running across here. Unwin Avenue will continue on its route eastward.
I like all the green roofs.
Yes. There are lots of philosophical orientations towards green uses in the area. And this is a view, another view looking west. This is looking west out the Keating Channel this way. What you see are a couple of arches here for bridges that are going to be in that spot. The Don River flows in here and currently just has only one option, a 90-degree right turn, but it will also now have a southward option to encircle Villiers Island going this way. Now, complicating this, of course, is who owns what. This is a current or relatively current Portland's ownership map. I say relatively current because this piece of land is no longer provincially owned. That's the Hearn. The province sold it to private interest. And we don't really know what's going to happen there. But you can see a few things here. This is Ports Toronto, and this lift bridge is also, that's the Strauss lift bridge, the green one that's there currently. That's also Ports Toronto property. What you see is also patches of privately owned land, and those affect the planning process. For example, this little piece right here is Lafarge cement, and they have another piece over in here. This is Quantex, and so on. Those pieces of private ownership constrain to a degree what can be done, but a lot of this land, as you can see, the purple is municipally owned land. Some of it is in long-term lease, which limits what can be done, but it's still municipally owned. But the unimpeded, so to speak, municipal lands are in purple there. And you can also see Waterfront Toronto owned land, really just a couple little patches in here. This is an overlay of both the planning future and the archaeological past. And I've included it because I like this green. The green is the sandbar and Fisherman's Island Peninsula that framed the south and west edges of Ashbridges Bay back when there was a bay. And so that sort of gives you a sense of both expansion a little bit to the west in lake filling here. All of this is lake fill, of course, that we covered in talking about the Ashbridges Bay. And down in here, you can see little blue patches. Those were the cottages and houses of the Fishermen's Islanders along there. This here, LP8, British Forgings, was the munitions factory. And wartime construction and so on. There are some other things here identifying shipbuilding and so on. The Toronto Shipbuilding Company up in here on Eastern, just south of Eastern Avenue on the Keating Channel. I showed you a picture of a World War I launch of a ship in there. This connects the images to civic, public, and natural realms. And so what you're seeing now, if you concentrate on the green, don't worry about the Tommy Thompson and so on, Cherry Beach, but the green north of the shipping channel and surrounding this area is new green in the sense that a lot of it doesn't exist now. And especially this area here where the Don River comes south of Villiers Island now in a created channelway here. This is potential spillway for the Don River too, if it gets too high to run along its two routes there. Let's see. Okay, so this is I put this in partly to show the degree of planning that's going into this. Already they are planning buildings and building heights for those buildings. You can see the scale of heights down the side here on the right. Most of the taller buildings will be in the north edge of Villiers Island and the McCleary district. Lower density, lower heights will be in this area. And I think some of this is actually partly constrained by the island airport over on the other side of the harbor, because the planes need to approach and take off over this area. The only thing affecting that now is actually the stack of the Hearn generating station, which projects up into the airspace for aircraft, and they have to observe that. This again focuses on what I was actually showing too, the aquatic areas and natural areas and aquatic habitats that will be in this area here, particularly, and a little bit south in here. The street network will remain much the same. There will be some new streets created, and Cherry Street will change significantly north of, say, about where the Cherry restaurant is here. It will bend out to the west and travel up this way and cross new bridges that will be built. One is built now and in place, another one will go in soon. There's also an existing infrastructure of buildings, what they call built and cultural heritage. Your sense of the value of these is probably not, what you might think. City planners are preserving things that, in some cases, I would say, who cares? But in a lot of cases, they intend to repurpose them as well. So there's a list of them down the side here, but I think we can get a better sense by actually looking at some things. Innocon is actually the concrete company, Lafarge. The Pinewood Studios are in place now. That's in the Film District. Toronto Hydro Service Center is in place over south of Eastern Avenue. There are ships moored in the Portlands. Leslie Street is getting greened as we speak. So some of what I was showing you before is there. Cherry Street is also being redone with islands down the middle and so on. It's a project ongoing. Villiers Street looks much like Villiers Street does, and Unwin Avenue looks like Unwin Avenue. If you've driven down to the Water Rats, it'll still look the same to you at the moment. The Marine Terminal 35 was in the planning as part of the built and cultural heritage. But if you might recall, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, it had a big fire and most of it burned down. The Atlas crane exists and plans to leave it in place exist as well. And you'll see where it goes in a bit. Obviously, the Hearn's 213 meter high chimney stack. This is over 600 feet. I guess it's around 650 feet or a bit more. Pretty high. And then other stacks here are the incinerator and the water filtration plant. Canada Cement Company silos. These ones are close to the West End. And then the Portland Cement Company. These silos are right near the current lift bridge over the Keating Channel. That's that little box. Then this thing swings up. We talked about that bridge before. The Hearn's got its scraggy outbuildings, and there's some hydroelectric infrastructure around on the Portlands as well. The incinerator, which is in the McCleary district that I mentioned before, the Hearn, the rail sidings. These tracks run along Unwin Avenue, for example. Ports Toronto wants to keep them in place because they want to continue with rail connections to their non-operating piece of land over by the Eastern Gap. I don't know if it's feasible. Who wants to run trains on these tracks, for one thing, and for another, these tracks are they execute turns that are too tight for modern trains. Commissioner Street is another one of the long, broad paths through the Portlands. It's got, as you can see, some hydro infrastructure and so on. This is the Bascule Bridge, the Strauss Bascule Bridge, right near where the RCYC ferries go. And the Keating Channel is here. The ship channel is another part of the cultural heritage. Here's some of the hydroelectric infrastructure. There are some company buildings, and there's an old fire hall. This is on Unwin Avenue. It will be relocated. It's from 1929, 1930 or so. This is the, again, we covered a lot of this, but this is the lake filling here of the Keating Channel and the Harbor Commission workshop and office being built right here. This building with the, it looks like a Model T or something sitting in front, still exists right now. It's a Port Authority operation where they run their dredging from. You might recognize what was the Bank of Montreal building right there at the corner of Cherry Street and Unwin Avenue, and the Toronto Hydro substation right north of the, used to be the Cherry restaurant. It's some kind of a barbecue restaurant now. The Commissioner's Community Hub is a concept for adaptive reuse of the incinerator building in the McCleary Park. And this is sort of a concept. There is nothing happening towards this at the moment, but as the Port Authority, or as Waterfront Toronto says, they envisioned it to be a hub of activity surrounded by a public plaza with large new local and district serving community center, maybe community events, flea market, farmers market, arts, culture, performance venue. They don't know really yet. The same idea here, and it's really hard to know what will happen with the Hearn because it's now not provincial, but it could be, as Waterfront Toronto speculates, maybe an experimental food hub, innovation and education center, a ruin garden, multicultural or multi-sport facility, or maybe even an art hotel. It's massive and it's big inside. Right now it's used for filming. Don't ask me what a ruin garden is. This is a lift bridge here that doesn't exist in reality, but would in the future over the shipping channel. Transit plans and cycling plans. I won't go into detail here, but basically the Portlands will be served with an LRT, and the LRT will run in from the west along Queens Quay and come down into the Portlands here over one of two new bridges that will go in here. The thing that the city's trying to work out right now is how to get the connection of this LRT running on Queens Quay to connect to the LRT that goes west on Queens Quay and up into Union Station. It's a bit of a complicated bit of planning because there are sewer lines and they would have to go underground at some point, and there's a hotel there with bus depot in front and Yonge Street Quay, and it's complicated. Or Yonge Street Slip. Cycling is a little simpler, but there are cycle routes planned for the Portlands. There's also a land use. This is the Central Waterfront plan, and the areas that they identify in the Central Waterfront plan. I'll just zoom it in a little bit so you can see it better. Here is a naturalized river mouth that we've talked about now a few times. The expanded McCleary Park in here where that incinerator is. And then over in here is the greening of Leslie Street with parks and open space areas here. Down in here, it's not so well defined, but it's to revise some public promenade. There may be a promenade that people could walk along the south side of the shipping channel. And then a little green patch here to the west of the Hearn in here. And the existing cement operation, Lafarge doesn't want to move, so they're going to stay there. And then there is a concept here. It says recognition of final river per the environmental assessment if the operation does relocate. And then there is the introduction of additional inner harbor special places marked here as number 8. And that's actually misplaced here. It should be up in here. And generally, there's a lot of emphasis on parkland and recreational use being promoted through the Portlands development. Now, pulling out a little bit, we're looking here at the overall harbor. And this slide is titled Signature Project, which is what Ports Toronto calls, or not Ports Toronto, why do I keep saying that? Waterfront Toronto calls. They envision 4 signature projects. One is a waterfront walk, and parts of it are in place now, but it would start over here near the foot of Bathurst Street. This is Ireland Park. They would go across that slip probably, and then there's walkway. Some of it's already in place along and around H2O Park and the Music Garden and so on, the Jaclyn Ferry Terminal and around down this way, and ultimately winding up down in connecting into the Portlands here. Some of it in the East Bayfront is already constructed as well. So they imagine that as one signature project. Another is the Jaclyn Ferry Terminal itself. And then 2 more are located on Villiers Island. One is a destination playground, and another is a landmark institution. These are very vaguely defined. But what they have in mind for the signature playground or the destination playground is something that is both for the communities in the area and for general use. This is not any way of Toronto. This is Singapore. But this is what they cite as an example of a landmark institution. In this case, these are theaters located on the bay in Singapore. They look at the Sydney Opera House. They look at a lot of things, and they think Toronto could have something like that. Another one of the signature projects, the continuous waterfront walk, some of it already exists. This is the Water's Edge Promenade in the East Bayfront. So this is near the foot of Parliament Street. It's already, that's in place. This is not an artistic recreation. You may have walked on that already. But extending that to the east, connecting it to the Portlands, is part of the vision of Waterfront Toronto. And we'll see a little later how that's planned. And then the other signature project is the enhanced Jaclyn Ferry Terminal. All I'll say about it right now is they plan to put a roof, and it'll be like a park on top of the area for the people standing around. Focusing in more narrowly at the Villiers Island, there's the precinct plan for that. And these areas are identified as Promontory Park North, Promontory Park South. These will have views of the inner harbor. The playground area would be somewhere in here. And then this is riverbed and naturalized area running through. Showing the old shoreline. This is an older aerial view. This whole dotted line here is called Lower Don Lands. Doesn't really matter that name too much. Villiers Island is outlined in red, and you can see where that Villiers Island sits on top of the older quays and wharves of that area of the waterfront. What's required through here, though, is extensive work. And what I'm going to do is change what I'm sharing to a different screen, and you get a look. If I can do this. This is an aerial flyby of Portland's construction. Now, I'm hoping you can see that. Let me know if you can't.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, I'm going to run it as video. There may be some music, but there's nothing more than
Deep
that.
excavation in the Central
Oh,
River
there's a-
Valley, shown here, is complete. You can see workers installing a liner, the large white sheet, to prevent contaminants from seeping up into the new river. Right now, we're facing east and tracing the path of the future mouth of the Don River, which will flow out of the Polson Slip. On the left, the large white structure is the Atlas Crane, a designated heritage structure. This area is the site of the former Marine Terminal 35 building and will become Promontory Park. The large piles of soil are where we're stockpiling some of the 1.3 million cubic meters of soil before the majority of it is treated and reused to raise grades around the site. The West Habitat Cove is one of 2 coves we created as high-quality habitat for fish and birds. This area is the Cherry Street Lake Filling Project. The channel running through it is a temporary drainage swale for stormwater. It features a renaturalized shoreline and the North Habitat Cove. We're relocating Cherry Street to allow for better connections to transit. Here you can see the Cherry Street North Bridge crossing the Keating Channel. This bridge will connect with the realigned Cherry Street. The Star X soil treatment system on the east side of Don Roadway can treat up to 1,000 cubic meters of soil per week. Now we're heading south over the future path of the Don River, which currently ends at the Keating Channel. Here you can see the soil management and water treatment areas. We're treating up to 1.5 million liters of groundwater per day as we excavate the new river valley. Now we're following the path of the river towards the Polson Slip. You can see the outline of the Central River Valley along the edges. This is where the new river will pass under the Cherry Street South Bridge, one of 4 new bridges we're building.
Things. Maybe a good time to show another thing is this bit here. The one you just saw is what's happening right now. That's December 2020. This is a 2016 vision of the Portland's development, and it remains fairly accurate. So I think it's actually good to see as well.
The waterfront is the gateway to our city, but for decades, Toronto's Portlands, just east of downtown, has been overlooked. Nearly 1,000 acres of the waterfront land sitting underutilized in the middle of a floodplain, its potential unfulfilled. But a new, reimagined Portlands is coming. Beginning with restoring the mouth of the Don River, a new river valley will be created to safely channel floodwaters into the harbor. New wetlands will enhance biodiversity, helping to clean our air and water and allowing wildlife to thrive. A new community, Villiers Island, will emerge. This is an opportunity to showcase smart, sustainable, low-carbon city building, a global model for others to follow, a vibrant community connected to downtown by public transit and cycling routes. Villiers Island will offer a mix of housing options for a variety of income levels and stages of life. It will offer valued amenities that will make it a desirable place to live, work, and play, embracing its natural and industrial heritage and contributing to Toronto's economic prosperity. Villiers Island will be a community of the 21st century, one that uses technology to improve quality of life, promotes active lifestyles with new parkland and waters to explore, and provides new public spaces to meet and admire the views. The Portlands will no longer be a place out of reach, but a place that will make Toronto proud. Because this is our city. This is our waterfront.
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond. This is the pool where cannonball records will be broken.
I don't think we're going to hear commercials there. Okay. Go back to share. I'm hoping, am I sharing now or not?
You're not sharing at the moment.
Okay. Let me get this sharing set up.
You're starting to share now.
Now perhaps you're left off.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
now see a map.
Okay. So this is where we left off. What we've done basically is a couple of flyby circles of Villiers Island, one of the current manufacture of the lands and future vision. And the interesting thing to me is actually how much of that 2016 vision is on track and not changed from over 5 years. Here's some of that historical context again. Startup, we saw this image. This is the old Ashbridges Bay. This is pre-Villiers Island construction down here. And you can see kind of where Villiers Island, where Villiers Island fits into the old Toronto shoreline. The 1882 shoreline where the Don River actually had two mouths into the inner harbor. The 1931 shoreline where some of these piers were built. 2017, before this work began, and this is the future shape of Villiers Island. And Villiers Island, these are points made by Waterfront Toronto. What Villiers Island represents in location is kind of interesting because it represents that new mouth of the Don River. It represents an interface where urban and natural meet. So you have watercourse running here, but you also have urban right along on the North Shore. It represents the heart of a regeneration effort in these various districts, the East Bayfront, Keating Channel District, which we haven't said much about, and it's in flux. McCleary District, Polson's District is south, and the South Ship Channel. So it's sort of central in that sense. It'll also be, as they say, a gateway to the Portlands because there'll be transit connections and cycling and mobility routes running through there. And so when you think of Portland's development, I think it does make sense logically to think first of Villiers Island. This is some of the earth moving and construction work that you saw in that aerial flyby. And this is some more of it here. This is a view facing west, and again you see the Atlas cranes here. They will be retained as, I guess, interesting artifacts more than anything else. And this will be the routing through cycle paths or jogging paths along the New Dawn, along the south side of Villiers Island. This bridge is already in place. This one arrived in December 2020. There'll be a second one. One will be for LRT traffic, light rail transit, and the other will be vehicular and passenger, vehicular and pedestrian traffic across onto the new Cherry Street. There will be, in addition, other bridges here. These two are in the south, and then these two are in the east, connecting Villiers Island to the McCleary District and eastward. One will be it's a double span, and the other will be a single span crossing southward. This is Cherry Street running south from Villiers Island into the Polson District. So here's another view to orient yourself. This is perhaps 2 or 3 years ago. What you have here is the Don River running south and the Don Valley Parkway running south and curving east or curving westward here. And then there's that exit off the Don Valley down onto the Don Roadway there. And here is the area that's going to become Villiers Island. Polson Key, the Inner Harbor is here, and Keating Channel is right in here. So that's how it looked 3 years ago, before the major work began right in here. And this is a similar view. Actually, I'll go back up to point out one more thing. This circular area here is Corktown Common. It's a park that was created by Waterfront Toronto, and then you have some GO rail trains here on train tracks. And here's Corktown Common again. Here's the GO trains here. What you have now in this future vision is the Don River turning west in the Keating Channel and going south of these tall buildings and north of these not quite so tall buildings, also splitting and heading south here to go around through that way and into the harbor there. I hope that makes sense. Here's another view of that built form. These buildings here are conceptual in the vaguest sense. They are what is called the Keating District. A plan was formed 10 years ago, but the plan has had to change, and they don't know yet what to really do with the plan because it depends on what happens to the Gardiner East. The city voted to tear down a segment of the Gardiner Expressway East. How much of it they're going to tear down depends on city politics, but it affects what happens right in this area. And that's unknown. But Villiers Island is pretty well known. What you see here is Cherry Street coming north, and instead of continuing on its line north up to here, that's the old Cherry Street right there, it'll take a bit of a bend to the west and come here over those bridges that are going to be built. There'll be two here, there'll be one bridge here, and there'll be a double span bridge over here. So Villiers Island will be surrounded with bridges. And this thing is a little vague. This is the Promontory Park on the west end of Villiers Island, looking west. And this is an artistic conception again of the Keating Channel, looking west again. You can see bits of Gardiner Expressway up in here. There's already the Keating Pub in there, a little further to the west. And this is the McCleary District, which we saw before with the incinerator and so on. Villiers Island is a little to the west of the McCleary District. So concepts here come to numbers, and Villiers Island will have about 4,800 housing units, and there'll be up to 10,000 people living there on Villiers Island. Jobs created something like 2,900. New waterfront access will be about 3 kilometers of new waterfront and 11.2 hectares of parkland. A hectare is what, about 2.5 acres, I think, roughly. Then we pull out to a different place altogether. This is what I mentioned before, the Leslie Street heading down towards Tommy Thompson Park is going to be greened, and the Leslie Street Outlook Park is another thing. So the Leslie Street Green Portal, this is traveling south on Leslie Street here. And you see Leslie Street goes into the Outer Harbor. There's the Outer Harbor Marina and the spit out here. The greening is just to make a more attractive passageway and pedestrian area. This little area right here where the shipping channel almost reached Leslie Street is right here. This is the Leslie Green Portal. And this is not a Waterfront Toronto project. This is a Create TO project. And what they envision here, this is the end of the shipping channel at the extreme end of the east end of the shipping channel. Leslie Street is here. So there's only really a small piece of land involved, but they are envisioning a park here with a beach. You wouldn't be going swimming in here, but it would be like Sugar Beach. And a viewpoint here. And you could look down the shipping channel to the west. But it connects these views. This is just right now industrial rubble. And this would be, say, the view from that little outlook. And this idea seems to have come up just in the last little while. Like in the last month or two, really. But what I'll do is I'll share my screen and you can just see a little video run through of this. Is that?
Yeah, it's showing.
Okay. There is no sound associated with this bit of video. So that would be kind of a beach right at the end of the shipping channel. And then a small area of parkland. This is kind of like a simulated drone fly through or whatever. Over to Leslie Street here, connecting to that green pathway up Leslie Street. Right now, coming down Leslie Street is not anything like an attractive travel, unless you're in a car, maybe. I think that probably, in the interest of time, is enough. You can sort of see where it is and what it looks like, what the idea is right there. Go back to the presentation slide. So are you seeing something now that says Leslie Street Outlook Park?
Yes, we are.
Next thing I'll skip through quickly here is the Ashbridges Bay sediment and erosion control project. Nothing to do with this other stuff, but it will be something to do with waterfront change in approximately the Portlands area. This is the current view of Ashbridges Bay Yacht Club, and was this the Toronto Hydroplane and multi-hull and whatever that club's called in here. And these are the eastern beaches here. This is the water filtration plant down here, so it gives you orientation. This is a Toronto and Region Conservation Authority project. And basically they're filling in a piece of waterfront. This is south and east a little bit, mostly east really of the Portlands, but it's where the Leslie Street spit touches into the Portlands here. And it's actually quite a massive project. These are pictures from last fall. So there are 3 cells. There are 2 here, and there's a 3rd cell under construction here. So they make the cells first, and then they do the filling inside them. So here's the first cell partially filled. Here's the second cell. And you can see what extent of lake filling is being done here. When it's completed, it will be, the 3rd cell will be here. Just backing up one screen, this is the 2nd cell here, and the 3rd cell is just under construction. So that will be completed out here and built in this way. This will add a whole lot of new waterfront, and I will have to talk at another time about what that will become. And then finally, I guess we're running tight on time here, but I do want to touch on Quayside and Parliament Slip because this was in the news just this week. The Waterfront Toronto has, I think if you remember from the Sidewalk Labs presentation that we had at Shellback's last year, it was about a year ago. We had people in from Waterfront Toronto to talk about the Sidewalk Labs plan, and it looked good at the time, but it disappeared. And what Waterfront Toronto has now is this piece of property called still Quayside, right here. This is at the foot of the Parliament Streets here, and Parliament Street slip is here. So Quayside is the area in question. RCYC tenders used to leave from right here. That's better. So the issue of ownership inside here, Waterfront Toronto owns some of this bit of land, about 10 acres, but it also includes land owned by the City of Toronto, Ports Toronto, and private landowners. And I believe Paul Henderson was saying that RCYC has some water rights in there. But Waterfront Toronto wants to develop this land regardless of the fact that Sidewalk Labs is no longer involved with the project. So they have a request for proposals out looking for people to do something with this area. They have things that they want done as well. Oh, I should just talk about the adjacent districts here. This is the East Bayfront precinct here, and this is the Keating Channel precinct here. And the reason I'm talking about this in the context of the Portlands is because it will connect to the Portlands. It will connect in 2 ways. There will be the pedestrian walkway along the waterfront crossing over the Parliament Street slip here. And then also, if you look here, what you see is Queens Quay running east. Normally, or the way it is now, it curves and runs up Parliament Street right there. But it will continue instead running straight east and joining onto Lakeshore Boulevard further to the east. And this area was in the news because they were talking about such things as this is a conceptual drawing, but to do something right in here where there would be like a pool, floating area, floating restaurant, something. So this is an artistic concept here, what they're talking about. New waterfront amphitheater, several lakeside swimming pools, floating docks with concessions, and a floating restaurant, among other public amenities. This is very much vague future, but these buildings do exist now. They're transparent in this image, but the East Bayfront buildings do exist. The issue of development is Quayside along here and Parliament Slip along here.
Ron,
Yes.
It's Bob Medland.
Yes.
At the north end of Parliament Street slip, there's a third of an acre that is owned by RCYC, I believe.
Yes. Paul Henderson mentioned some ownership there with water rights as well.
That's correct.
And that, I mean, what I read here didn't specifically identify RCYC, but I think it might be this piece.
Yeah, it's the diagonal seawall.
Yeah. And that came from Gooderham and Warts originally,
That's correct.
that they had a water frontage in here. So that hasn't appeared in the very public discussion, but I think it will certainly figure into things, which is why I identified this piece of ownership here. What Waterfront Toronto says now is a little bit vague when they talk about private landowners. Because it looks like the planning is moving ahead, or the theory anyway. But again, these are blue sky sort of visions for this area. You can see the silos have disappeared and other stuff is built in and so on. Concepts of Parliament Slip don't look very much like Parliament Slip today. But in the East Bay front, you do also have these buildings under construction. Aqua Vista and Aqua Luna are current projects. And then the last thing, and I'm just going to point it out, is that Waterfront Toronto has just released this month their marine use strategy report. They've been working on it for a couple of years. It updates one from about 10 years ago. And it's not to do with the Portlands per se, but it's worth your time to give it a read. It talks about a lot of water frontage issues, ownership issues, transit lines, water transit lines, and so on. It's something to maybe talk about again in the future. And that's it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Ron. When they're doing these artist renditions, did anybody take into account any of the costs?
Yes, I didn't go into the budgeting of the whole thing. How is this being paid for? Well, Waterfront Toronto has about $1.4 billion from the 3 levels of government that connect to it. That will do the landform work, and the city will be doing some of the infrastructure like sewage and so on. The construction will be managed the way that Waterfront Toronto has managed other stuff. This land that now is of relatively little value to the city will become valuable land that the city can sell to developers for the construction that's happening in these areas. So there is financial modeling. I didn't cover any of that, but if you go in to look at the precinct plans and the development plans, I mean, there are literally thousands of pages of information on this. They go into a lot of detail. They go into detail like how the wind is going to blow around between these buildings and in what ways. I mean, that's, So although the artistic impressions seem very pure, they are sitting on top of all kinds of technical studies and economic studies as well. Maybe that's for another time as well.
Okay, thanks. Just to remind you that if for everybody, that if you want to ask any questions or comments, please follow the procedure to raise your virtual hand, and we will take you in order to make sure everybody gets a chance. So does anybody have any question? Yes, we do. John O'Dwyer, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
I will say that
great presentation as always. My question is, not that I'm a member, but I go over there sometimes to volunteer. Is there any change to the RCYC ferry position?
it's a little bit outside of the precinct planning going for Villiers Island. I can't tell you what what might happen, but I believe that the RCYC is sitting on Port Authority land, not city land. I stand to be corrected on that, but I believe that they are on a piece of Port Authority land. And
Okay.
the Port Authority is not really involved in much of this Portland's development planning at all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next is Jim Winslow. Go ahead, unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Oh, my funny comment. A few weeks ago, I went driving around down there, and it's possible to get into a narrow street, which you then have to back up for almost a half a kilometer. So if you go exploring, be careful down there. So my real question is, what's the geology like in that area? And and I recall there was a building in San Francisco that had a lean to it in one of their developments. So the question, I guess, is how far to bedrock is there for the foundations for these buildings in that area?
I can't tell you offhand. I can tell you that the central waterfront buildings are sitting on bedrock. That the bedrock in a lot of this area is not too far down. And beyond that, I can't tell you, but I could probably find that in the site studies for this area, because what they did do is a fair bit of study. For example, all of this was filled land in the first case, and it's beneath that the bedrock sits. So really, what they're doing now is kind of maybe the first 20 feet of material and decontamination and so on in there. If you're talking about foundations, though, for buildings that are going to be sitting 10, 20, 30 stories high, they would be going down to bedrock, and I'm not sure how far that is.
Further east, there was a small earthquake region, and I forget how far it was. It was like 30 or 40 kilometers east. And I was wondering if there's any analysis about bedrock slippage in those areas.
I don't know. I know that there is a fault line that goes down the center of Lake Ontario.
That's what I have in mind.
Yeah. But the bedrock in this area is, I think, mostly shale. I think it's probably a fairly stable thing, although I don't know how much high-rise construction in Toronto plans for earthquakes and of what magnitude.
Thank you for a remarkable detailed talk.
You're welcome.
Okay, next question is Julia. Go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Graham. Ron, unbelievable amount of work, not only putting your show together, but what Toronto is about to do. You mentioned Sydney Harbour, so, you know, the curved structures. Did somebody from Australia come over and advise the Toronto urban planning people?
There's quite a bit of Waterfront Toronto inspection of other city waterfronts and what works and doesn't work. I could probably show you. I'll send you a link.
All right, send me a list of.
I'll send you a link to, and maybe Diane can send it. I'll create a set of links, and Diane can put them out in the next email, because all of my presentation pretty much this time comes from materials generated by Waterfront Toronto and the City of Toronto. And it's all online. Although there's a lot of it, you can sort of route down to your area of interest. But there is one planner at Waterfront Toronto called Chris Glasick, who has presented to Waterfront for All, speaking about the signature projects for Waterfront Toronto, the 4 that I mentioned, and also about successful waterfronts around the world, looking at Amsterdam, Sydney, Chicago, New York, Singapore, and so on, identifying what things work in those waterfronts, what things don't, what things might transpose to a Toronto waterfront and so on. Because clearly, you know, we have a waterfront that's seasonal, whereas some other places don't. And, you know, we have things like industrial infrastructure that we need to work around, but we have also old infrastructure that can be removed or repurposed and so on. So the situation is different, but looking at what has worked in other places and what hasn't is actually a useful exercise that Waterfront Toronto has done quite actively.
I also noticed that it's a lot greener, which is a #1 priority.
Yes.
And I would think they're heading into being able to perhaps hold the Olympics, or at least increasing the amount of tourism visitation to the area.
Yes, I think that the idea of a sort of featured signature destination on the waterfront would be part of that, certainly. I don't think that they're thinking primarily of Villiers Island as a tourist site, but it could have some of that for sure. Like the promontory park that looks out over the waterfront would be appealing to tourists as well as residents.
Well, there are boats or little ships that go across to the islands as we know them today, that would then do a bigger loop maybe around that area to showcase the
Yes.
development.
Yes, you can see some of that when you look at the back here at the Marine Use Strategy Report. What you see in here are some connections to water connections to the portlands, going along the Keating Channel, coming in here, and so on.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it is in mind, I guess, is what I would say.
Okay, we'll
Right.
take one last question from Marie before turning it over to Diane. Go ahead, Marie. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for the very interesting presentation. I was wondering, in the Marina Bay Sands area in Singapore, they have a little bit of a mini forest, and then they have different types of like flora and fauna from the region. And I was wondering if the plans for Waterfront Toronto are to make something similar.
I don't know. Excuse me. I do know that they plan in the naturalized Don River to be using native forms and and a soft wall, so it's not going to be like the dock walls that we see throughout the central waterfront.
Thanks.
Okay. Now I'll turn it over to Diane. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. Diane? Oh, good.
I just want to say thank you, Ron, on behalf of all of us, for that an amazing presentation. You've obviously done a lot of digging in order to come up with all the maps and the videos. I wondered about accessibility. Has that been a big part of what they're putting together for the whole waterfront?
Yes, they do have that in the planning as well. So they're looking at accessibility. I think there was, in one of the artistic representations, somebody in a wheelchair traveling along a walkway of some sort.
Yes, there was actually in the end of the Keating Channel, the part that the City of Toronto is doing, and that's actually what triggered my mind about it, because that is such an important aspect of integration of our population, is having accessibility wherever anybody can go. We should all be able to go. I think that one of the huge aspects of this whole project are the complications of who owns what, and trying to get that all sorted out.
That was one of the things that that the waterfront planning, the use study was focused on. I don't know if you're seeing now a presentation page, Future of Waterfront Revitalization Aspirational Projects.
No.
No?
No, we're
Okay.
not.
Let me just jump to that. Maybe you're seeing it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This is a presentation that looks at top 10 big city waterfronts. And this was what we were just talking about here. The waterfronts that Waterfront Toronto was looking at, Stockholm, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and so on. And what they do is they look at the defining attributes for these different locations and how frequently they're found and what sorts of things there are in these waterfronts. Let me just see if I can.
Is that a link you can send to us, send to me, Ron?
Yeah.
So that I can include that?
Yeah, I'll put together a little sort of set of links and references and so on, so people can look these things up themselves. But here are the things like the Waterfront Promenade and which of these waterfronts have it and so on. You know, here's the Copacabana Promenade. Chicago's got a river walk. Hamburg has got the Langdonsbrücken Promenade. Embarcadero Promenade in San Francisco, and so on. So they're looking at, there was Sydney for you there, and so on. So they're looking at various cities and what sorts of things they have in the bridge crossings, things that Toronto is contemplating now for around Villiers Island and elsewhere. So they do look at other places in the world explicitly for concepts. The idea of a destination park in Chicago, Stockholm, Singapore, and so on. Anyway, I will send that material out as a link, and you can look through that stuff at your leisure.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Ron. Again, you always do such remarkable research, and we thank you for enlightening us as to what's coming up in Toronto and keeping us apprised of that. And I certainly will take you up on another presentation in the fall or next year. So thank you so much. And let's just give him a nice round of applause there for just such a fine, fine presentation.
Bravo.
Absolutely, bravo. And next week, we have Chris Redford joining us from the city of Hamilton, and he'll relate the exciting story of the Hamilton and Scourge project. These wrecks are rare examples of vessels used during the War of 1812. The National Historic Site is located at the bottom of Lake Ontario, 11 kilometers north of Port Dalhousie, near St. Catharines. And then following that, we will have Amanda Karahanas, and she's coming to us from the Disabled Sailors of Ontario, and she'll bring us an update of their activities and a look into the future for them. So with that, thank you all for showing up. Remember our rooms afterwards if you want to stay and talk. And with that, pipes out.